raising children on their own without financial support. This is hugely important because this determines whether a child is able to be fed, never mind clothing and shelter and all the other basics. Specific actions regarding maintenance that impacts on the economic vulnerability of the applicant and the child. I'm trying to be PC, but the reality is that the majority are women. But there are many men that also have difficulties trying to get financial support from their ex-partners. So when women approach the maintenance court, it's important that they are treated with dignity and with respect. And maintenance staff seem to forget that the people who are going to the court are actually their clients and that they should be treated as such. The person who is there to uphold their child's right has a constitutional right to dignity, not poverty. The best interest of the child is of paramount importance in all matters concerning the child. Understand what financial abuse is, the immediate and the long-term impacts on your client and their children. Legal representatives. Not everybody can afford one. Treat the interests of your clients as paramount. Interest of justice in maintenance. If you're a labor lawyer and you're doing somebody a favor by representing them in maintenance court, you really are not doing them justice, because most labor lawyers do not know the Maintenance Act. And most people assume that it's easy, it's simple, and the court is dysfunctional, so it doesn't really matter anyway. Understand your client's financial vulnerability and not generate unnecessary work, nor involve your clients in unnecessary expenses. Understand what financial abuse is, the immediate and long-term impacts on your client and their children. This includes being sensitive to your client. Most women approach the court with trepidation due to the bad reputation that precedes the maintenance courts and fear of a place of authority. We are conditioned from a young age to fear authority, particularly places of authority. And the courts are a place of authority. Section 10 of the Constitution, everyone has an inherent dignity and the right to have their dignity respected and protected. But when they approach a court, many women have already experienced some form of abuse, including financial and economic abuse, that has affected their emotional, mental, physical, and financial well-being. And the worst is, the mother has no protection under the Maintenance Act. She's there to uphold her child's right to financial support from both parents. That is fair, reasonable, according to their means, and proportionate to income. If the other parent is not financially supporting their child, they are financially abusing their child, intentionally or unintentionally. Intentionally ignoring a court order is a criminal offense. But there is apparently a directive not to criminalize maintenance matters. So we find the implementation and the enforcement lacking in terms of holding people accountable. The crime is against the child, not against the mother, yet the impacts are more on the mother as she has sustained the child on her own and navigate the maintenance system, which has a financial and emotional implication on herself. More than anything, she has an expectation that the staff are trained, helpful, and will enforce the act in order to protect the child and by default to protect her economic well-being. She does not expect to have to do a crash course in law to navigate the process and then to still hold personnel accountable. Maintenance amounts matter. The food poverty line is 624 Rand per person per month. This refers to the amount of money that an individual needs to afford the minimum required daily energy intake. This is also commonly referred to as the extreme poverty line. The lower bound poverty line is 890 Rand per person per month. And this refers to the poverty line plus the average amount derived from non-food items of households whose total expenditures equal to the food poverty line. The upper bound poverty line is 1,335 Rand. So let's understand this properly. Worst case scenario, an applicant, mostly women, is unemployed and receives a child grant of 460 Rand, her only source of income. Divided by 2, that means the mother and child get 230 Rand each per month. If the extreme poverty baseline is 624 Rand per person, they're not even able to take in enough nutrients to meet their daily energy requirements just for their bodies to function. This excludes shelter, clothing, education, and health care. One might say the grant is for the child. Yes, it is. But how does the child survive without the mother? If it were not for the child, the mother would be more flexible as to where she stays and greater access to job opportunities. Above this, she provides the care work, which, as we know, is unpaid and undervalued. Let's give it an estimated value. Mother looks after her 3-year-old child due to her not working, and she's having to live with family. So I've just, for the sake of this, done and rounded off a figure. Creche, 500 Rand. Cares for extended family's children, 500 Rand. Cooks for the extended family, 500 Rand. Nurses the children when they are sick, 500 Rand. Teaches the children, 500 Rand. Cleans the house whilst other family members are at work, 500 Rand. Cleans the garden, 500 Rand. Those are minimum amounts, and that comes to 3,500 Rand. She is contributing to her child's well-being at a huge sacrifice to herself. Healthcare might be free, but she has to pay to get there to access it. When the child goes to school, it will have to be a no-fee school. And it must offer meals and possibly free transport. She will have to find the money to pay for school uniforms and stationery. She might be able to look for work once the kids are at school, which will cost her money for transport to look for work. And if she has no skills, it will be a low-paying job in an economic environment that you have over 40% unemployment. So she might be lucky to even get work. The notion that the mother does not contribute needs to be rejected with contempt, and the monetary value needs to be taken into consideration. We have such a progressive constitution, yet we are still so backward in our thinking. The extreme poverty baseline should be the benchmark for minimum amounts of maintenance granted. And that's a contradiction to the Maintenance Act because it says fair and reasonable and proportionate to means. But if the primary caregiver has to do what she has to do in order to protect her children and provide for her children, there has to be a greater responsibility placed on the other parent to contribute and provide in some way until he is earning an income. The economic and financial impact on applicants. Mother's probably not getting any financial assistance when she makes the application. The longer the date she has to wait for financial support, it puts her under continuous financial stress. The lengthy time periods for first appearance on average is approximately 3 months around the country. That's if the person receives service, if they appear in court. And that is not the norm across the country. Applicants having to serve documents. It's becoming the norm for applicants to serve papers on the defendant. This is supposed to be a function of the court. The only reason applicants are encouraged to do so is so that they have some control over the proceedings. And that is that they know that the papers have been served and that there is a reasonable expectation that the person will appear in court. This is an additional financial cost to get to SAPS, possibly more than once, with trips back to court. And some defendants are in different towns or provinces. Clerks don't even ask the applicant if they have the means to. They just give them the document and expect them to have them served. Most of them don't even know what that means. I mean, they come into our groups and go, does it mean I need to take the signed service back to court? The sheriff's fee is also not affordable for most applicants. Besides the fee, they incur the expense of getting the documentation to the sheriff. So the point I'm making is that there are so many costs attached to having a directive served. Yet it's just handed, assuming that the applicant can do this. And that also impacts on when the court date, when they can serve the summons, because are they working? When can they afford to take the time to go and have it served? And this comes back to respecting the applicant as your client. Maintenance agreements protracted. Each postponement without a maintenance agreement puts the woman and the child at risk. Risk to hunger, risk to illness, risk to not providing for the child's educational needs. Another month that she has to say, sorry, we can't afford it. Risk to being blacklisted, risk to loan sharks with a huge interest, risk to having to sell her assets if she has any, risk to cashing in policies, risk to cancelling non-essentials like car and life insurance, which causes the risk to greater economic harm. Maintenance was not equitable and proportionate to income. I don't know how many times we all hear 50-50. Nowhere does it say 50-50, yet it's almost the norm in courts to say 50-50 without even looking at income statement and telling the applicant to go and get a job because she's not contributing. Many women are self-employed, be it in the informal sector or in mainstream, and it costs them a day's income each day they have to go to court, losing income that they desperately need. Many spend so much time in court that they have to take unpaid leave to attend court, or they use up all their leave and then they have no leave to recover, to have a bit of a holiday, to do other things. Every single postponement has a major impact, not just on the material, but on the emotional and the psychological. A woman is so desperate, she's under so much pressure, she's getting calls all the time from the school, from creditors, from the kids. So when she goes to court, although she knows it's not likely going to be resolved, she hypes herself up and she has hope, only for that to be dashed again. Because either he hasn't appeared in court, or they've told you to get a legal representative, or the maintenance officer is not at work, or they're just too busy. Maintenance agreements not adhered to since court ordered. Of course, it has an economic impact on the applicant. Maintenance is not paid on the 1st of every month. So if it's paid on the 7th or the 10th, the courts don't really do much about it, because at least he's paid. You're lucky he's paid. However, if the mother is employed and she has debit orders, those are all being taken off at a period of time. And there's a period of time that she does not have cash. She is unable to put petrol in her car or pay for the kids to get to school. She's unable to buy food. Those 7 days are critical. So she either has the choice of buying food or risk being blacklisted, which again has a huge economic impact on her. She can't get a loan, she possibly can't get a job. It's important that maintenance is paid by the required date with consequences. Deliberately paid less than the court-ordered amount when there is the financial means to pay the court-ordered amount. Emolument orders granted due to non-compliance. The father then appeals the order and boom, payment is suspended until the court date. Maintenance not increased yearly. So many applicants are told to come back every single year and apply for a variation, even if it has the inclusion of an increase. They're told to go back and make it an order of the court. I don't understand it. One, if the court has already got such limited resources, why is it putting additional pressure on itself? Why is it telling a whole thousands of women to come back to court once a year? It should be mandatory. Historically, men earn more than women, and it's still very prevalent in 2022. I sat in on the 5th Pillar webinar last week, and it was mentioned by economists that for each R1 that a man earns, a woman earns 26 cents. Let that sink in. Why does all this matter? It matters because the applicant, mostly women, has no protection under the Maintenance Act. And I can't stress that enough. Historically, women have been and still are economically disproportionately disadvantaged, and women are still carrying the bulk of the financial and economic responsibility and the undervalued care work. Child maintenance is one of the main barriers to attaining economic equality and security in this country. As I asked last month, how are women protected under the Maintenance Act? Who is the Act meant to protect? And who currently benefits from the Act? Who benefits from the Act? Does anybody want to answer that? Is there any woman in here who has been to the maintenance court that actually feels that they were truly represented and protected by the courts? Is there anybody? Is that not a sad indictment? And that is the truth, because women have no protection. Due to not having any protection, it is incumbent on the court personnel and legal representatives to always be cognizant of the financial and economic consequences and impacts on the applicant and the children, to interpret and enforce the act within a time period that does not cause more economic, financial, and emotional trauma and harm to the applicant and the children, now and well into the future. To be aware of the hidden costs that the applicant is expected to carry. For example, a transport leave, paying for bank copies, tracing, serving documents. Sometimes it is these issues that discourage applicants from pursuing child support. If a mother is earning minimal, it's a toss-up whether she takes this money, 100 odd rand, to get to court or buys food. And we've discussed that the applicant can apply for reimbursements, but the courts do not know this, and people don't know how to enforce. And when they say, but Advocate Ratus said so, who the hell is Advocate Ratus? Oh, don't come and talk that rubbish in my court. It says witnesses. You're not a witness. These directives need to be issued, and every single person needs to be so aware. It's a difference between upholding the child's right and not, and food. If men are not held accountable financially for creating children, they will keep having children without considering the financial implications. One being to financially support the child until the child is self-supporting. And we hear this. I signed up for sex. I did not sign up for fatherhood. Well, it's a bit late for that. And while I'm focusing on the mother and the applicant, it's because the child can't represent herself. But we forget that if we don't protect the mother, we are not protecting the child. And in all of this, it is the child's right to financial support from both parents. Yet in the maintenance court, it becomes about the adults. And I'm disappointed that the same emphasis on the Children's Act and co-parenting is not applied in maintenance court. The Children's Court have become so child-centered and so child-focused. And in the maintenance court, men are benefiting. They're protecting the economic situation. They're protecting their means to do what they want with their money. They are being encouraged and allowed to continue manipulating, controlling women, their ex-partner, to punish them. There was a post the other day on my group. She said, I'm going to have to take you to maintenance court. And he said, you are going to regret this decision. Her response was, I don't know why I feel so scared. I don't know why I'm feeling so intimidated. Obviously, there's a history of abuse. At the moment he says those words, it triggers her, and she questioned whether she did the right thing by approaching the court. If women are not relieved of the burden of raising children on their own, they will find it difficult to escape poverty, abusive environments, as well as make financial provisions for their latter years, and will increase the burden on the state's fiscus to provide for elderly women. The legislation is mostly in place. We can't keep expecting and demanding amendments to the legislation and not change the behavior, or not even implement the existing maintenance agreement, the Maintenance Act. The basics of the Maintenance Act are not being implemented. Yet we are looking for more legislation to make up for the existing legislation not being enforced. It's bizarre. Like, I literally do not understand it. This is not an attack on any person. This is to understand the context and encourage more diligence in protecting our children and those whose care they are in. The world has evolved, yet human behavior does not appear to have evolved. And in all the gains for equality, they will amount to nothing. Because in 20 years' time, we are still going to be talking about the same thing. I came across a book that was research done and released in the form of a book called The Voice of the Child in Maintenance Matters. And the DOJ contributed quite extensively to this book. It was released in 2004. And just about every single thing that they spoke about in this report still exists today. Every commitment that the Minister of Justice made back then has not actually happened. Sorry, other than the family courts. But they are still dysfunctional. They are still operating as three different entities under one umbrella. And we often have three different cases in three different courts. So the people dealing with the child care or in the domestic violence have no idea what is going on in the maintenance course and any other. Each file should actually have every aspect of every court in it. So every single magistrate can get a holistic picture. You can't demand abuse or scream, I'm being financially abused, have a case in the domestic violence court. And the magistrate has no idea what financial abuse is or understand. You can't even talk about abuse. You can't talk about physical, emotional, psychological abuse in the maintenance court. Because they're not equipped, they have no sensitivity training, they do not understand it, and they come there with their own bias. How do we change this? Political will. We saw what happened with COVID. And if I read what the minister said in 2004, and nothing has changed now, clearly there's no political will. Because if there was, there would be policy, there would be directives, and we would see with the existing resources much better protection for children, and we would see an improvement of women's economic health. And that's why, as applicants, it's important to understand that it's a form of economic abuse and financial abuse. And even if they will not listen to you, that you talk about it. The more you talk about it in the courts, it will start forming some kind of curiosity. And if they hear it 3 times a day, they will start going, what is this? We have to change it from bottom and top up. When there's a call for action, everybody needs to support. We need to sit down with the president. It doesn't really help that much that I sit on all these forums underneath the GBV NSP. I've only just recently been invited to the Pillar 3, which is the justice, and it's because I became aware that they're doing a 100-day challenge in Bloemfontein to do alternative dispute resolution in maintenance matters in Bloemfontein. And I'm not saying that nobody knows anything, but I'm curious as to what they're doing. I can understand what their intentions are, and I support it. But this is happening in a silo. It's supposed to be a collective. And we can do that, but when we're doing alternative dispute resolution, there's a balance. And I'm not saying that there's no compromising, but we are probably asking the mother to do more compromising. And I think it's imperative that we put more pressure on